Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Maria Farah, and I'm the UN New York representative for Franciscans International. Our organization is part of the Mining Working Group, which is a coalition of NGOs advocating at the UN and helped organize this parallel event to the 70th session on the Commission of the Status of Women. The event today is co-sponsored by the Republic of Fiji, LCN, Burma, the Descendants Project, Pusaka, Somo, and the Rohingya Mayafunar Collaborative Network. We have an amazing group of speakers today who will highlight a number of contexts marked by state and corporate violations of human rights and environmental degradation, including cases that rise to the level of international crimes, as well as actions towards accountability at the state and international level. Each speaker will have about 10 minutes, which should leave plenty of time for a period of question and answer. First, we are really grateful to have Fiji's Permanent Secretary of Environment and Climate Change, Dr. Savendra Michael. Fiji has been a leader in environmental and climate justice, including leading calls for a robust plastics treaty. And in 2024, Fiji joined Vanuatu and Samoa in proposing an amendment to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court on the inclusion of the crime of ecocide. Permanent Secretary Michael, thank you so much for joining us today and staying up late to do so. I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Mara, and Bulavinaka colleagues, and warm Pacific greetings. I'm dialing in from the capital in Suva at 1:36 a.m., but nevertheless, I'm really excited to be joining each of you just to give our perspective on the work around the plastics treaty, as well as the situation back home and what the Pacific's red lines are. You would recall, many of you who have been in this space, that the Pacific has been a strong voice in many fronts within the multilateral space. It all started, with the Rio Conventions, when we spoke about the special circumstances of SIDS and LDCs and what that means to us in the context through a declaration that came out in 1994. And today we know that the multilateral, space is, or multilateralism is a space that is continuously, being challenged with the plethora of pressures that different governments have. Equally, part of this problem is the marginalization of human rights, as well as the, um, under recognition, or no recognition, or little recognition of indigenous knowledge, traditional science, and so forth. And so, in our journey, in 1992, the government of Vanuatu, just as our colleagues Mara has mentioned, had started this whole journey on the loss and damage, and what loss and damage meant in the context of the Pacific, and what we go through in terms of comparison. And a few weeks ago, I was just speaking at a Asia in 2050 conference, and the Pacific governors was invited, and we only had one single Pacific speaker. And quite frankly, I said at that meeting, it's so disappointing that we have flown so far just to be in this panel, only to be asked, what is this, what is the impacts of climate change back home? Because one cyclone takes away a third of our GDP, which basically is not the same in Asia, and high industrial nations. And so why I'm telling you this is because this is exactly how the 1992 revolution started, with Vanuatu explaining to the world what loss and damage meant. And it took us 28 years to negotiate a loss and damage fund. And on the 29th year to have the operationalization of the loss and damage fund under the UNFCCC. Now, fast forward, we are now negotiating the Global Plastics Treaty. Again, we are looking at articles across, the full life cycle of plastic, from extractive industry, which includes the fossil fuel industry, to the production, to the midstream and the downstream, as well as the, I don't like to use the word waste pickers, but of course, the traditional custodians of the land, where these landfills are, the waste management facilities are, the producers are, the polymers of producers are, and so forth. So for the Pacific, we've been clear from day one, and we will remain as adamant as we are. We are net importers of plastic. We don't produce plastic. We've just done a whole plastics inventory now in our country. Fiji is made up of 332 beautiful islands, right, spread across a very vast ocean as big as the size of Australia. So we are quite huge in ocean space, but we are quite small in land space. Our oceans are 3 times or 4 times our size. And we have within this Pacific Ocean the Great Pacific Garbage Patch and many other garbage patch, which is waste that actually floats into our side. So at no point in time is the Pacific going to accept a treaty that will neglect a production cap or the discussion around production, will neglect the indigenous traditional science, will not talk about public health because the plastics crisis is a health crisis, and is only going to focus on downstream measures. We also will not support a plastics treaty that does not want to list out chemicals and chemicals of concern, because we as consumers deserve to know what chemicals make up the plastics and what percentage of these chemicals are harmful. And transparency and accountability is one aspect of a conversation that does not happen quite genuinely in the spaces that we are in, particularly in the bottling and the packaging of things that come into our shores and affect our health and the health of our marine ecosystems as well as our land ecosystems. We continuously speak that about the fact that we are from the oceans people. We are connected to our land, yet it's so important for us to completely turn a blind eye towards what's happening around us by the producers, by those that are affected and so forth. I know Jo Benna is going to speak on the indigenous rights. She's an amazing advocate. She speaks very frankly to us as negotiators, and these are the kinds of humans that we need around us when we are negotiating treaties. And I think it's really important that we are not going to walk away from a plastics treaty that only looks at the downstream measures, because we are not ready for a waste management treaty. We already do waste management in our country. And just like the Paris Agreement and the Climate Change Convention, as well as the Biological Convention, we will remain firm with our positions, and our red lines are our red lines. Thank you, Mara. That's all I have to say. I'm going to take any questions at the end, and I hope I stayed within my 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. So just to confirm, would you stay until the end or would you like to do a couple? Okay, great. Thank you so much for your
If
time.
if possible, if I can do questions, because I do have an early morning start,
Yeah,
but I can do two more speakers, then questions perhaps, if that's okay.
sure. We'll do that. Thank you so much. Okay, so next we have Dorothea Wabisar. Dorothea works with the civil society organization Pusaka Bantala Rakyat, who advocates for indigenous peoples' rights and environmental justice in West Papua. Dorothea?
Hello. Okay. Hello, everyone. Um, Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for having me here, Maria and everyone. As Maria has mentioned, my name is Dorothea Wabisar. I'm a West Papuan. Oh, shoot, I don't know how. I wanted to share some pictures, but experience technical issues. Okay.
It popped up briefly for 2 seconds and then it went away. So I don't know if you wanted to try again before you started.
Yes. I hope you can see it now.
It's just a dark screen now. Oh, here it is now. Now we see it.
Okay. Uh, yeah. Okay, I'll introduce myself a little bit again. My name is Dorothea, but people know me more as Defe. I'm from West Papua. And as Maria said, we accompanying indigenous communities in West Papua who live near plantations of palm, timber, and currently at the moment it's a sugarcane plantation, one of the biggest deforestation case that I will talk in a moment. Just wanted to give an information when I speak about West Papua, what I mean is the western half of the island of New Guinea. So we are still under the Indonesian administrative area. So um, we are in the easternmost part of Indonesia, which is um, oh, oh, which is this island. Um, Currently, in West Papua, there is one of the biggest deforestation case we wanted to say in the world because there is one Indonesian have their own development project. It's called National Strategic Project, and my organization we accompany a community who live within the area where they wanted to build a 2 million hectares of food estate project. And for the 2 million hectares, half of it, the government will build sugarcane plantations, sugar factories, and its infrastructures. And also, in the other half of the area, the government will build new creation of rice fields. The total area of Merauke is 4 million hectares. So when the government wanted to open 2 million hectares, it means they wanted to open half of the area. And now and it happens on top of the customary lands of 5 tribes in Merauke. And this happened since at the end of 2023, where the government mentioned about it. And in Merauke, if we look at the history of the community or the landscape, the government, this is not a new project. In 2010, there were previous project called MIFE, Merauke Integrated Food and Energy Estates, and where we are still under the Dutch colony. There are also the rice field or project called Padikumbe. I think the government see this place as a place where it has the landscape that can be used as a rice fields area, but because of there is problems from the government, there is a debate between the indigenous people's concept in Indonesia, because Indonesia they don't ratify ILO 169, or even though they are one of the signatures of UNDRIP, the concept of indigenous community is still debatable. Sometimes they said everyone is an indigenous communities in Indonesia or not at all. So if we wanted to secure our land and forest, we have to get the legal recognition from the government. And it is a super long process. We need to map down all the histories, the indigenous territories and everything. Normally, it take more than 2 years, and then we have to wait for the government if they agree. They wanted to recognize the indigenous community so that we could change the status from indigenous people to indigenous people that recognized by law. So while we don't have that legal document, the area will seen as an empty land. That's why it's very easy for the central government always map the area in Papua to put, oh, we will build these specific plantations here, or we will build, or we open a mining concession here, or any investment, especially foreign or investments to support the national strategic project happened. Without acknowledging that there are indigenous communities in this area. And when the community heard about this, we worked together and tried to reject the project because, as I mentioned, the previous projects already destroyed Merauke. The governments already used 1.5 million hectares for the rice fields and palm plantation. And because of that, we did demonstration at the level of villages in Merauke or even in Jakarta. We did a demonstration in front of the Ministry of Defense because militarization is heavily involved in this project. And But then, because it is a national strategic project, a development project, we cannot intervene it. It will still happen anyway. But at the end of 2024, we try to use the special procedure mechanism. We send an urgent appeal to the UN, and there are 9 special rapporteurs responded to the letter. They were stating their concern regarding the right to food, the rights of women and children, the rights of the access of clean water, and also the local and global implications of this massive deforestation that will happen in Papua, not only for people in Papua or Indonesia, but also everyone in the world if we talk about climate crisis. And the governments already responded to the letter, but still they were saying that things regarding the recognition. They said that until today, there are no documents requested from the indigenous communities from Merauke. So there are not indigenous communities that are recognized by law in this area. So it is still legal for the companies to do the land clearing. And per December 2025, for this project, they already clear more than 42,000 hectares area for the two of sugarcane plantation, and also uh, one rice fields company called Jonglin Group. And this Jonglin Group, they ordered 2,000 excavator from China to open the area. And today I wanted to talk about the most impacted actor in this case, which are the women. And I wanted to introduce to you to this woman. Her name is Aloysia. She If you have time later and then manage to watch a documentary movie it's on YouTube by Gecko Project. It's called The Sky Split Over with Papua. She got questioned by the interviewers. They asked her a question and asked her opinion, what happens if your land and forests are gone? And she said, the first thing that she said is, if the forests and land are gone, what will happen with my children and my grandchildren? It's just a simple statement but it shows that she didn't think about herself, but she thinks about the next generations, her family, because everything's that the land clearing, the militarization, the intimidation, the horizontal conflict, they cut access for her to go to the forest to get to support her daily living. But still, she didn't think about the herself. She thinks about her family, even though sometimes in this case specifically, there is no FPIC process. So there are overlapping stress experienced by the woman. But in the other part, I also wanted to introduce you to this woman, the woman in the middle. Her name is Sinta. On 5th of March, she, with other indigenous communities, went to one of the administrative court in Papua to sue one of the companies that already do the land clearing. One of the things that make me always remember about her was when she said, to all the women, don't be scared to speak, because when our children get hungry, they are looking for their mother first. They are looking for us. And currently, together with her and other indigenous representatives, we are bringing this case to court in Jayapura or at the local level, and also at the national level. We are asking the judges at the constitutional to reviewing the regulation regarding the national strategic project. Our request is that the government, we need international pressures as well to pressure Indonesian government to evaluate this project, because it does a lot of more harm than bring goods to the indigenous communities. We don't want Merauke or Papua to become a sacrifice zone for Indonesia, because currently the ethnocide and ecocide is happening in West Papua. I think that's all my intervention. I'm sorry I took so many times for the technical issues. Thank you, Maria.
Thanks so much, Stefe, for highlighting the targeting of indigenous lands via national strategic projects and also the obstacles that that Indigenous communities face in terms of formal recognition. Next, we have Yasmin Ola. Yasmin is a feminist Rohingya human rights activist, a poet, and an author of children's books. Her family fled to Thailand after a wave of violence in the Arakan in 1995, and she remained a refugee for 16 years before resettling in Canada. Yasmin is currently leading a Rohingya-led, women-led, and refugee-led organization called the Rohingya Myanmar Collaborative Network. She is also the United Nations Minority Fellow. Yasmin?
Thank you so much, and a heartfelt thank you to the organizers and to everyone gathered here today for this important conversation. It is an honor to contribute to this dialogue during the CSW. My name is Yasminullah. I'm speaking to you today from an unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. Unceded means that the land was never surrendered to the British Crown, and it is my responsibility to uphold this awareness as I myself am a Rohingya genocide survivor whose ancestral homeland is under siege by armed actors and corporate greed. When we speak about genocide, we often focus on moments of extreme violence that shock the world, burning villages, mass killings, and the forced displacement of an entire population. But genocide rarely begins that way. It often begins slowly and structurally through policies that strip people of their rights, their dignity, and ultimately their humanity. For the Rohingya people, genocide did not begin in 2017. Long before the world saw the images of villages burning and hundreds of thousands fleeing across the border to Bangladesh, the Rohingya were already living under what many have described as a slow-burning genocide. In 1982, the Rohingya were stripped of citizenship through the discriminatory Myanmar citizenship law of 1982, rendering us stateless in our own homeland. Once citizenship was taken away, other rights soon followed. The Rohingya were denied freedom of movement, prevented from traveling between villages arbitrarily, and required to seek permission to marry. Even reproduction was restricted. Entire communities were subjected to systems of surveillance, control, and humiliation. These policies did not exist in isolation. They were accompanied by cycles of military violence, sustained hate campaigns that portrayed Rohingya as outsiders in our own land. Yet to fully understand the violence that unfold, we must also examine a dimension that is often overlooked in the discussions of genocide, the intersection between resource extraction, land control, and mass displacement. The Rohingya homeland lies in a region rich in natural resources. In the Bay of Bengal, off the coast of Rakhine State, lies one of Myanmar's most significant offshore energy reserves, the Shui Gas Project, discovered in 2004 by POSCO International, formerly known as Daewoo International. The gas field is located roughly 60 kilometers offshore from the town called Jokpyu. Development began in 2007, and by 2013, the pipelines and production systems were in operation. Gas from these fields flow across Myanmar and into China, generating enormous economic value. But the story does not end offshore. Our major infrastructures linked to these energy routes has transformed the region. At the center of this transformation is the Jokpyu Special Economic Zone, designed to be a strategic logistical hub connecting the Bay of Bengal to China through oil and gas pipelines. This corridor allows energy shipments from the Middle East and North Africa to reach China without passing through the congested Strait of Malacca. From a geopolitical perspective, the project is immensely valuable. But for communities living on land, the consequences have been devastating. Beginning in 2012, waves of violence erupted across Arakan or Rakhine State. Riots broke out in Sittwe in June 2012. Violence followed in Jokpyu in October of the same year. In 2013, attacks spread to Thandwe. These incidents were widely framed as communal clashes between ethnic groups, yet the consequences were strikingly consistent. Rohingya communities were displaced, entire neighborhoods were emptied, wiped out, and large areas of land were cleared. In Jokpyu, tensions escalated following the killing of a Rakhine rice merchant who had reportedly attempted to sell rice to Rohingya. Leaders on both sides mobilized in anger, fear, and violence followed. But the outcomes was telling. Both Rohingya and Rakhine residents fled the area. Once communities were gone, land was seized and expanded for infrastructures connected to the economic zone. Across multiple locations, areas affected by violence often overlapped in locations of strategic economic importance, linked to the energy extraction and transport infrastructure. These raises a very uncomfortable but necessary question. To what extent were genocidal dynamics intertwined with the pursuit of land resources and economic projects? Genocide is often framed purely as ideological hate, but in reality, it can intersect with economic interest, territorial ambitions, and extractive industries. I would even go further in saying that the Rohingya genocide was designed for profits. When we discuss accountability for the atrocities committed against the Rohingya, the conversation is largely focused on state actors. Legal proceedings are ongoing before the International Court of Justice, and the investigations have taken place at the International Criminal Court as well as through universal jurisdiction cases in countries like Argentina. These efforts are critical, but they're not the whole picture. Corporate actors have also operated within this landscape. One example is a telecommunication company called Telenor. In 2019, a Rohingya civil society group filed a complaint under the OECD guidelines alleging that Myanmar security forces used Telenor cellular tower as a vantage point or sniper post during a military operation in August 2017, during the height of the genocidal violence, when the Rohingya civilians were fleeing from the village of Alethancho. The case was examined by the Norwegian National Contact Point for the OECD guidelines, which concluded that the company had not directly caused the misuse of the tower, but was linked to the adverse impact through its business relationships. Importantly, the review highlighted that the company had not sufficiently prioritized engagement with the most vulnerable communities affected by its operations, namely the Rohingya. This reflects a broader pattern. Corporate due diligence process often overlooks stateless communities because those communities are effectively invisible within the legal system. In the digital sphere, there have been many attempts to hold companies accountable. Legal actions have been brought against Meta platforms over the role that Facebook actually played in amplifying hate speech and incitement against Rohingya communities. But when it comes to extractive practices or extractive industries, particularly those linked to natural gas exploitation like the Shui project, accountability has been far more limited. This absence of accountability raises profound questions, particularly in the context of gender justice. Genocide is never gender neutral. Rohingya women and girls experiencing systemic sexual violence, trafficking risk, and collapse of family structures. Many became head of household after male relatives were killed or disappeared. Today, in the refugee camps, women continue to carry the burden of survival while navigating insecurity and trauma because of the funding cut. At the same time, Rohingya women have been at the forefront of resilience and advocacy. They are documenting testimonies, building networks of solidarity, and demanding justice across international platforms. And that brings us to the theme of this event, generating justice. If justice is to be meaningful at all, it cannot stop at prosecuting generals or condemning governments. It must also examine the broader ecosystem of power in which atrocities occur, including the relationships between governments, corporations, infrastructures, projects, and extractive industries. It requires ensuring that corporate due diligence centers the voices of the most vulnerable communities, including stateless people and displaced women. And it requires recognizing that genocide and ecocide are often interconnected. When land is cleared, community removed, and ecosystem transformed for extractive projects, the impacts fall disproportionately on marginalized communities, and within those communities, on women. The Rohingya genocide is not only a tragedy of the past, more than 1 million Rohingya remain displaced today, and only 1% of the Rohingya worldwide, out of the 3 million of us, have access to documentations. Women continue to struggle for safety, dignity, and justice, and we cannot return to our own homeland unless accountability emerges. Until accountability extends to every actor involved, state, corporate, and international, the structures that enable this genocide will remain intact. And if those structures remain intact, the risk of future atrocities remain as well. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much for your powerful intervention and really underscoring the role that corporations have played in fueling and profiting from the Rohingya genocide and ecocide. As mentioned earlier, Dr. Michael will have to leave shortly given the large time difference. And so we asked for a few questions for him to take, and we'll take the other questions for Dorothea and Yasmin at the end after all of the other panelists have gone. I see that there have been a couple of questions that you have already responded to, Dr. Michael, regarding how states like Australia, US, and fossil fuel reliant states in Asia responded to Fiji's position. And also a new question is, what is your sense of Pacific Island nation support for climate justice more widely? For example, do island nations like the Republic of Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and Palau that historically go along with US policy stances support climate justice initiatives concerning plastics and other issues? And just as maybe a final question, many of the individuals on the call work with civil society organizations. So if you have a specific for us when we're undertaking our advocacy towards the plastic treaty or in other UN spaces, please let us know.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So yeah, as I have responded to some of the questions already, I think, when it comes to Pacific seeds and work around climate justice, irrespective of our other Micronesian Pacific Island countries that share very close linkages to US, we have very strong leadership that really hold to account or demonstrate the solidarity. We do have our own governing process where the Pacific leaders actually convene to, identify the priorities. And one very good example today that we are trying to use the mining, was it the Mining Act or the Mining convention, sorry, that was in the pre-days, how that came about through the UNGA process or through a treaty process. We have the Fossil Fuel Treaty, previously known as the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Northern Pacific Island countries are also signatories to and are driving this as well. A lot of times we have seen that, there are, like, for example, the US and their stance on the plastic. It's really disappointing because, these are the countries, I mean, for US to push for, like, for example, about finance to be largely from private sector, from innovative sources of financing, uh, despite the ties that it has with the Northern Pacific, like Palau and Marshall Islands, show us an example of where this works. Show us an example of where this has actually, kind of been applied or practiced, irrespective of your relationships with the country. There is no model that has actually ever worked in the Pacific. So I think it's really that consistency in terms of the calls that we make and the consensus that is reflected within us in a solidified way, for greater protection, for limits on plastic pollution, most importantly for accountability for environmental harm. I think the Pacific are the loudest in most of these spaces, and three of the things that I wanted to really center around before I leave is the Pacific has always and will always send a very clear message to the world that protecting our environment is not an environmental issue alone. It is about justice, survival, and the future of humanity. We also have been very clear that if the international community recognizes crimes that destroy human life and dignity, such as the fossil fuel industry, then we must also recognize that recognize the destruction of natural systems that sustain life. So we are also supposed to be doing that on the tandem. And our leadership, I've always said this, we ride on the shoulders of our elders. The Pacific may be small in size, but we are the guardians of the largest ocean and the largest climate regulator of the world. Although we are suffering from uh, a situation or a climate crisis that we did not create, it is also our responsibility to call for people to respect and hold those accountable that are continuously contributing to the climate crisis as well as the plastic pollution crisis. So with these few words, I think I will end. I will drop my email on the chat, and please feel free to message me, email me any questions that you have, and I will be able to respond to them. It will not be at 1 a.m., but it might be 1 a.m. your time. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much again for your time and staying up late to be with us today. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll remain in touch. The next speaker today will be Joe Banner. Joe is the founder and director of the Descendants Project. Holding bachelor's and master's degrees in communications, she uses her education to honor the legacy of enslaved people while defending descendant communities. Joe is a fierce advocate for environmental justice, working to eliminate pollution from grain and chemicals. She represents frontline communities in global spaces such as the UN Plastics Pollution Treaty, highlighting the health toll of plastic production on Black communities and other fence line residents. Joe?
Sorry, I'm muted. Thank you for the introduction, and really honored to share the space with you today and to hear from the powerful interventions that have gone before me. So I really appreciate you all sharing your experience. Once again, I'm Joe Banner. I'm located in Louisiana in the United States, and my community is Wallace. My family has been a part of this community for over 300 years. So I'm the 10th generation in my village of Wallace. Now, the municipality that I am a part of is called St. John the Baptist Parish, which is like a county. But I think it's ironic that I'm speaking to you from St. John the Baptist Parish, from a place where we are suffering with so much damage to the environment, so much pollution in our land, water, and air. And if you read any biblical accounts of St. John, you know that in his heart was nature, and he honored nature. He would go into the desert for contemplation and fasting, and he used water as a spiritual conduit. And yet here we are, St. John the Baptist Parish is in the heart of Cancer Alley, where we're dealing with so much pollution of our air, our land, and our water, and also with government corruption, especially with corporations. The first corporations in the area of Louisiana and other parts of the country, but particularly here, was the plantation system. And this system was built on extraction of my ancestors from Africa, and also extraction of the sugarcane from New Guinea. So it was really ironic that to be in this panel together, because my ancestors were brought, and also this crop was brought, and we were forced to endure conditions of just denial of our human rights in order for us to exist. And we're seeing that continuation of harm and extraction through the oil companies and the pollution that's put on a place of plantations. So what I will do is I just have a couple of slides to share. So I will just share my screen. If you can see that, what we have here is a Marathon Petroleum, and you will see on that land, this plantation, this house, that's a plantation home. The plantation systems built on extraction were the perfect footprint for the petrochemical companies and oil companies to come on that land. So the large acreage of land that they needed, the water that was built by the was used by the plantations, and also just the disregard for human rights and the government subsidies developed the footprint for these plantations. So the oil tanks that you're seeing is on that plantation site. Marathon, the plantation home is still there. If you visit Louisiana, you can see that. Also in this space, the burial grounds for the enslaved. The enslaved Africans did not have a place to bury their loved ones, and so they would pick the land or seldom used pieces of that land in order to bury their loved ones. And so now these tanks and these sites are on the burial sites of the enslaved in our sacred spaces. Sorry. The next slide that I'm showing you right here, this is a depiction of the Cancer Alley portion of Louisiana. The yellow dots represent plantation land. And this was from the Atlantic publication, this graphic that I'm using. So all the yellow dots are plantations. The red dots are petrochemical companies that are now on the grounds of that plantation. So you can see that the system of exploitation continues through the fossil fuel companies. And I say fossil fuel and petrochemical, but there's also different forms of pollution as well. We're also dealing with aluminum pollution and steel, but this system opens the door for continual pollution. And this is just another diagram of Cancer Alley. And in this region of Cancer Alley, you'll see that we are dealing with a lot of different issues with low-term birth rates. We have cancer, of course. Our community is we have one of the highest rates of cancer in the country. So we're at the 99th percentile of cancer risk. And residents of St. John the Baptist Parish, the average resident has 1,000 times higher risk of developing cancer than other people who live in other portions of the country. So it really is showing how that connection to the plantation system has really impacted communities, particularly communities of color. Now, for us as Black women, we are particularly vulnerable to the chemicals that are being produced in these facilities. So we have higher rates of breast cancer and ovarian cancer. And oftentimes, though, we are the ones who are having to fight and push up against these polluters. Our government, our elected officials, they stand by. The corporate capture is real. When we go into these spaces where we try to intervene for our health, we're often shut down. My sister and I, who is the co-director of my organization, we have been threatened with arrest. We have been thrown out, escorted by cops from governmental meetings for simply just wanting more answers or asking questions about zoning, about economic development, about permit hearings in order to protect ourselves. And that is seen as an act of violence. And because our actions are seen as violent, we are treated with violence. We are harassed. We have been harassed online. We've had flyers put up around our communities that talk about anything from our weight to our salaries. We also have arson that happen on our properties because when these companies, these corporations come in and try to promote these projects or get the community on their side, they do it at our expense. And so we are the last line of defense in these cases, but we also like the first line of assault. So we've seen our community fabric essentially deteriorate as these corporations, as corporate actors come in and they try to split communities apart so that they can get their projects in. Now, we also are facing subsidies in the hundreds of millions of dollars to keep protecting these polluters. So even if there is a downturn in the market, for example, petrochemical, there is a downturn in the market. Louisiana's economy no longer has this as the main producer. There's other parts of our economy that are actually producing more income. Yet because we have government subsidies that keep supporting the industry, they're allowed to keep building more facilities. They're allowed to keep producing the chemicals, and they're allowed to keep shipping it. So the market does not control what is being produced with these industry, which just puts us and more harm. And I'd like to just also state that the reason why we are the Descendants Project is because we are fighting for descendant communities of the Africans. When we are protected, our communities, everybody gets protected. Although our communities are first and worst when it comes down to the harm, everybody is on that line. We're on the front line, but everybody stands on that line. So it's so important to protect communities like mine in order that we can stop the pollution. The chemicals that are produced in Cancer Alley in Louisiana, these chemicals don't just stay in Cancer Alley. They go all over the world. And so the plastic problems that you're facing, the LNG issues, the gas, the sugarcane issues that you're facing, Louisiana is a big player in that. And that's why like, international intervention, federal intervention, but definitely international intervention is needed in order for that to subside. So we advocate in these spaces. I've had the pleasure of listening to Dr. Michael's interventions throughout the process. And we are there in those spaces because our government at local level is so corrupted and just so captured that international space is the only recourse that we have. And even when we go into these meetings, our trips to the UN, for example, in Geneva, they're used against us, and it's treated as a vacation. And like, oh wow, they're going to Switzerland again. And not even really the reason why we're in Switzerland is because we have to be there in order to make sure that the world knows what's happening in our communities. And I will end with this and just saying that it's essential that we have a space for Afro descendants to share their experiences in the United Nations space and other spaces, but particularly there. We do not have that major group system that allows us the time to intervene. So we have to rely on our other groups there to give us the space in order for us to tell a story of what happened to the Afro descendants, particularly in the global north. So one of the asks that I have is to ensure that we have that major group developed for Afro descendants so that we can show the harm that happens oftentimes to our Black descendant communities. And if we need the justice, if we want the justice, we have to ensure that Black communities have that justice because it will have a huge positive impact when it comes to justice for others around the world. So with that, I would end. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you for highlighting the, as you put it, generations-long impacts of exploitation and extraction that continue, and also really highlighting the reprisals that you and your sister face for the work that you do. And, you know, it is something that a lot of human rights defenders and women human rights defenders continue to face around the world. So it's really important that you continue to speak out about that. So thank you. Our final speaker is Lydia De Leo, who is with SOMO, the Center for Research on Multinational Corporations. Lydia is a criminologist specialized in state corporate crime. She leads SOMO strategic litigation efforts where she works with coalitions to hold multinationals accountable for their role in human rights violations, including in Palestine. Before joining SOMO in 2015, she worked with human rights organizations in Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, and South Africa. Lydia?
Thank you, Maria. And yeah, again, thank you for inviting me as well. It's a real honor to be on this panel. I think the interventions before me laid out so clearly what the interaction is between state and corporation in oppression, violence, extraction. So I think what I'm going to say related to Gaza will only just build on that. And I think echo a lot of the analysis as well from previous speakers. So I will focus my story on Gaza and the Gaza genocide. And for those of you who are not as familiar, there's a wide consensus among academics, human rights organizations, locally, internationally, and even UN institutions that what is happening, was being perpetrated in Gaza against the Palestinians constitutes a genocide. So having said that, it's to say that the genocide did not start. I mean, the start of the genocide wasn't in 2023. So there were a variety of precursors, as you can imagine. But it was even the United Nations that had already said that Gaza would become uninhabitable by 2020. And this was done through a number of policies. So there was an absolute segregation where Palestinians were kept inside an open air prison, effectively, which was the Gaza Strip, and it was surrounded by fences, naval ships, and it was very difficult to enter or exit. Similarly, the blockade also prevented a lot of supplies from coming in. I mean, there are many documents that show that even, for example, chocolate or coriander was prohibited from entering the Gaza Strip. It was really an absurd policy, but which also resulted in a lot of disease, a lot of pollution, wastewater management, electricity networks. Nothing could be properly maintained. So the pollution was incredible, and it showed in people's health, and especially women's health and young children's health. So the segregation, the dehumanization was already there. And then in 2023, we all saw what happened since. And what happened in what is happening in Gaza has so many corporate connections, which I will get into. But I also want to stress that this is not unique to the genocide in Gaza. This is present and visible across Palestine, where corporate ties and corporate interests incentivizing the crimes that are being perpetrated against Palestinians. The most obvious one, which will come as no surprise to any of you, I think, is the extractive industry. So it is really to take as much land and water without Palestinians, or with as little Palestinians as possible. So through policies of forced displacement, then corporations come in and take land for agriculture, and they start extracting. And then some of these companies, they have the audacity to say, well, we provide livelihood for Palestinians. Look at all the Palestinians we employed. So it's also pushing, sorry, I have a terrible cold, pushing Palestinians into a process of exploitation through labor as well, in addition to their forced displacement. So it's agriculture, it is the extraction of stone, it's the extraction of natural gas offshore, it's the extraction of minerals. Every natural resource you can think of is being extracted through settler colonial processes. And then on the way in, there is also tourism. And I'm not going to say that that's a huge amount in terms of economic value or relevance, but I think it does a lot with the normalization of the settler colonial project. So it is to normalize and to take tourists. Sometimes these tourists come unknowingly, sometimes knowingly, into settlements, have their holiday there, and think that they kind of visited the quote-unquote Holy Land. So the tourism industry is definitely part of the normalization. And then the last thing I want to say about the generic context is that tech, specifically artificial intelligence, surveillance, all of that is being tested. So it is a testing ground. Palestine has been used as a lab for many decades on how to, best use technology for segregation, how to best use technology for identification, targeting. And now we are seeing the most extreme form of it in the Gaza Strip, which is using artificial intelligence to tell you who's going to live and who's going to die. That is where we have reached. So a little bit more on specifically what has been happening in Gaza and what are the enablers. I think I would recommend everyone to read Francesca Albanese's report, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Occupied Palestinian Territory. She set out a wide variety of industries that are seen and to enable the genocide in Gaza. The most obvious ones are as you can imagine, the weapons industry and the quote-unquote dual-use items providers. So dual-use items are items that are listed and categorized as having a dual use, both civilian and military. But the problem is that these lists are compiled and set by states. And these states obviously have to have an incentive or a political will to list a certain item as such, because it comes with an obligation to do licensing, to do export control. So for a whole lot of items that I would say we can all argue they're dual use, they're not listed, and they're flowing into the Israeli military apparatus, apartheid apparatus, without any hindrance. And some examples are, again, the tech. Artificial intelligence, hardware, software is arriving in Israel as if there's nothing wrong with it, completely closing eyes to the fact that there's an apartheid and genocide context in which technology plays a very important role. The same for vehicles, excavators, the image of, well, I think I haven't started my screen share. Where is it now? I'll show you an image later of which is an aerial view of what Gaza looks like at the moment, and it is a complete apocalyptic view, and it is not only due to airstrikes. It is also that following airstrikes, vehicles are brought in, specific types of bulldozers are brought in to ensure that the entire neighborhood becomes uninhabitable and that people who are displaced will most definitely not be able to return. And the impact on women specifically of that displacement, 90% of houses in Gaza have been destroyed or severely damaged. On women, the impact is disproportionate, with little to no access to sanitation, to healthcare that they so much need, prenatal care. None of that is really accessible to women, with all consequences that has. Another dual-use item that I wouldn't have thought of until I started looking into it is dogs. So the Israeli military has been using dogs in the commission of the most horrendous atrocities. Without going into much detail, it has been widely documented. There's a lot of visual evidence of these abuses having taken place. And then we discovered through our research that there are 3 Dutch companies that have been obtaining export or certificates for dogs, that their dogs have been checked and certified for export to Israel. So that's not a licensing procedure, rather it is a requirement of transporting living animals across borders or outside of the EU. And these companies are basically training military and police dogs, and they have been sending these dogs. That is something that I will get to later on what we try to do to stop this supply chain. But again, all this to say that there's supplies that are going into the genocidal system are more diverse than you would think at a first glance. Energy is another and the final one that I'll describe shortly. Israel has no meaningful crude oil reserves to speak of. So it is almost entirely dependent on importing crude oil and different types of fuel, including military jet fuel. The military jet fuel they have been getting from the US via US companies, and crude oil has been coming from a number of regions with the help of mostly, but not only, Western oil companies and oil traders. So again, it is if we want to think about where is the leverage or where can pressure be built by civil society as well as states, I think the energy sector is a very important one. Now I will try to share my screen because I want to show a map. Let me see if it works. Yeah. Can you all, does it work? Can you see the, no, don't think it does. I'll try again. Screen one.
Yeah, it's working.
Yes. Yeah. Did it pop up? Okay, great. So the gas, it was mentioned before, gas infrastructure, gas reserves. We can't separate analysis of those reserves from what is happening to people that happen to live in those areas. And with Gaza, it's no different. So in the top right, you see the darker brown is the Gaza Strip. The red are identified offshore natural gas reserves. And these discoveries, as well as other discoveries that are outside of the image, were made in the 1990s and 2000s. And the unlawful blockade, including maritime blockade on the Gaza Strip, was imposed increasingly over the 2000s, until an almost total blockade in 2007. So what that meant for people in the Gaza Strip is that they could no longer access their fishing waters without being attacked, intimidated, and arrested. And meanwhile, international corporations, Israeli, European, and US corporations, were going ahead with exploring and developing and extracting from the fields at the top. And there's a significant risk that pillage has already been taking place. It is difficult to ascertain because Palestinians do not have access to their own territorial waters, let alone their exclusive economic zone, which they declared in 2019. But from our research, we can tell that there's a huge red flag. There are many red flags we see with the way in which these gas fields have been exploited, that it is almost impossible that it would have been happening in a way that did not extract Palestinian gas from underneath the waters. You also see a yellow, I hope you can see it, kind of a yellow line coming out of the shore. That is the pipeline that runs from Israel to Egypt through the coastal area offshore the Gaza Strip. Again, there's no Palestinian consent that we know of for the laying of this pipeline or the use of this pipeline. So there's a number of international legal concerns there as well. And the process continues even a few weeks after the start of the genocide in October 2023. The Israeli government went ahead and issued licenses to Israeli and foreign oil and gas corporations for offshore fields. And a number of them are positioned in what is likely inside the Palestine declared exclusive economic zone. So there's more, there's, I think, a lot of more work to be done on accountability in relation to the gas industry. I do want to touch on the overall financial economic flows because it's such a stark picture, I think. Foreign direct investments are, for the most, like a large part of it is coming from the EU. The EU is responsible for 72.1 billion euros in investments, which is almost double the amount that is coming from the US. And then when you look inside the EU, this is the picture. So the Netherlands is responsible for 2/3 of all foreign direct investments coming out of from the EU to Israel. And we know that the Netherlands is a tax haven, so you would expect that a lot of these investments are coming through what they call special purpose entities that are simply just set up for beneficial tax arrangements. But Dutch authorities have assessed that actually only 12% of the Dutch investments going to Israel come through those entities. So there's probably a lot more substance to these investments that you would think at a first glance. It's something we're looking into now, and we hope to be publishing in a month or 2 months. And findings so far are quite horrendous in terms of what companies are have a big stake in these investments and the trades they're involved in. But more will be published. I don't know how much time I have left. I see a clock in the bottom of my screen, Maria, but I don't know if that's...
I don't see that clock, but maybe if you can wrap up in the next 2 minutes.
Yeah. So many efforts have been ongoing to target and cut corporate ties with the genocide and wider atrocity crimes in Palestine. What you would hope is that companies themselves understand it, but again, I don't think any of us are naive. Some have disengaged, most have not. Then state action, I think the Hague Group is an example of where some states have been trying to take some action as a third state, take the responsibility and put in the guardrails for what corporations are allowed to be involved in and whatnot. But more often than not, it falls to civil society action, and some of us do litigation. So a number of us, so Al-Haq, SOMO, and the Rights Forum and ELSC have filed a criminal complaint against Booking.com in the Netherlands because of the tourism that they enable. And we're arguing that this is a form of money laundering because the proceeds that they obtain from these activities are actually proceeds of war crimes underpinning the settlements. We filed this 2.5 years ago. It's shocking to even say it. So we're now, the prosecutor hasn't acted yet, so we're now considering next steps, which would be putting it to a court to decide whether or not the prosecutor should open an investigation. And then finally, because I mentioned the Netherlands and the huge role that the Netherlands plays in so many different areas, we took the state to court because rather than going after each and every company individually, we thought we should address the state. And if we get the court to hold the state to account, it has to impose certain rules on companies. So we wanted to stop arms and dual-use exports to Israel. The exports of dogs to the army should stop, and we want an end to all settlement trade. Unfortunately, many obstacles to justice. So there's a lack of transparency, which is what you would need to litigate. You need information, but also finding lawyers to litigate around Palestine turned out to be challenging. And then the costs. Luckily, we found an amazing team which agreed to a capped amount, which we were able to cover with crowdfunding. So I think it was a really good example of how grassroots can work and still access the system, but it comes with a lot of hurdles. And then even the standing of Al-Haq, MSN, and PCHR in this court case was challenged by the state because they didn't meet the precise requirement of what an NGO that could litigate in the Netherlands would have to meet. That argument was unsuccessful, at least in relation to Al-Haq. So the case went ahead. But in the end, the outcome was that, yes, the court found there's likely genocide in Gaza, and yes, the Netherlands has obligations, and yes, the Netherlands should act right now. Can't wait for the ICJ ruling. But we're just a judiciary, and we're going to not order any measures, because then we would sit on the chair of the legislative or executive power, which we're not going to do. So I think it was a lack of judicial courage, but it is a ruling that we can build upon in the future, hopefully. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lydia, also for highlighting the various sectors that are engaged in the genocide and occupation, ranging from tourism to weapons to surveillance. Now we have about 20 minutes for question and answer. And so if anyone has a question, please do pop it in the chat. I see a first one to Joe, who did respond, but I wanted to see if you have anything more to say. In Louisiana, have local groups been successful in keeping the Formosa Corporation the Formosa Corporation? I don't know if you would like to elaborate on that.
Yeah, and I can the groups have been successful at keeping them at bay, but we've been fighting for Formosa in different forms for almost 40 years. So my community was almost dismantled to facilitate the location of Formosa Plastic, which was going to build the largest plastic plant in the world. And it was through corruptive actions of our parish president that changed the zoning of the land in order to have the ordinance needed for them to locate in our community. We fought back, the community fought back then, and we thought that Formosa was gone, but in one way it was, but it wasn't, because industrial zoning stayed on the land, despite the fact that it was done through, it was accomplished through illegal means. So we are continually fighting to protect this land zoning because of Formosa in the 90s. Although Formosa did not build here, they are attempting to build about 10 miles away from where I'm at right now in St. James Parish. So it's an ongoing fight, many different communities, many different time frames, but at the end of the day, it's just a court battle after court battle in order to make sure that we can get them away from our community, and hopefully away from anybody's community.
Thanks so much. I'll ask some questions and wait for others to please join in. Dorothea and Yasmin, I thought it was interesting that you both highlighted this issue of national strategic projects and really tied to infrastructure and extraction. And so I was wondering if you felt that corporations also use this kind of overarching umbrella as national strategic projects to kind of protect themselves, and it provided an extra obstacle in terms of your advocacy because of the state's close involvement and support. And then for Lydia, I was struck by your raising of the issue of the dogs that have been used for a while in terms of torture and other violence. And I actually remember at least 10 years ago that being brought up in advocacy. So I was hoping you could maybe mention a few cases where there has been positive action for companies that have been pulled out, not just these prolonged cases of, companies really holding their ground. So first I would go to Defe if you have anything to add, and then Yasmin.
Yeah. As I mentioned, this national strategic project were reminded people about the previous project, the food estate project in 2010. And at first, it is very hard to find public information about who will open their concession on top of Merauke. But when we found out there are, for example, for the 10 sugarcane companies, um, all of them are using new names, new companies' name. But when we look for its owner, all of them are the companies that already got the concession in the previous project. But then, because in Indonesia, in some period of time, if you don't operate, the Ministry of Forestry or the Ministry of Investment might revoke your permit. Um, um, they got supported by the National Strategic Project to facilitate this in a new form, so new names, and it looks like a new companies, but it's already the company that was there. And then when we look more in detail, we also work with Joanna in Somo to try to find more information about the supply chain. And this 10 sugarcane company is connected to only one family in Indonesia who also owned a palm plantation in all over Papua, not only in Papua, but in Kalimantan and in other islands. So oligarchy is a big issue here, and they are very close friends with the president. And if you look at the other part of the Merauke for the rice fields project, um, it's managed by one Indonesian businessman called Haji Isam, and he is the cousin of the Ministry of Agraria, who facilitate him to go to Merauke and got to work with this 1 million hectares area for the rice fields project. But then he is famous as a palm plantation businessman in Kalimantan. So we might think that they now do the land clearing for the rice field, but it might change the commodity in future. So the oligarchy is a big issue here, and at the end of the day, the victims are the communities who lives there. Yeah.
Thanks. I just want to note that Joe commented this is so similar to Louisiana. Yasmin?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I am so happy to be able to kind of elaborate a little bit. A lot of this note is from Debbie. So shout out to Debbie Stoddard for, mentoring me and helping me with a lot of the understanding, I guess, with, understanding that corporate responsibility is often something that doesn't exist. And we have to hold these entities accountable as much as we hold states and individuals accountable. So when it comes to the landscape of the Rohingya genocide, it's not just about specifically oil and gas companies or extractive practices that exist within the region, but it spans farther beyond that. And a lot of the times that when you said, Maria, that a lot of this is national strategy or economic plans that countries push out. Sometimes we hear it in the ways that it's framed as a non-interference clause. So when it comes to ASEAN or Association of the Southeast Asian Nations, conversation about holding companies or holding individuals accountable for human rights violations. We're not even talking about genocide or mass atrocities. Oftentimes they would come back to us and say, like, we don't interfere with the sovereignty of another nation. But they have no problem whatsoever to actually interfere with each other when it comes to economic interest or anything that produce profits. And so when it comes to the Rohingya genocide, continuously, ASEAN has become a safe haven for the military asset, for the Myanmar military assets, and for various other, profit-driven trades and agreements. When it comes to Russia and China, which is, unfortunately, both countries are perpetrators in many other genocides, including the Uyghur genocide, Russia and China continuously provide weapons to the military junta. So does Israel to Myanmar military. And so here we see the connections that countries that commit genocide have with other imperialist forces, imperialist nations. We also see that, the very same way that the Rohingya are being exploited and our land have been confiscated or our lands have been dispossessed, the same practice is also being done in West Papua. And so our existence as indigenous, as people with ancestral homeland that are being ripped apart from us, all of this are interconnected in some ways. And the last point that I want to make is that if we just zoom in on Shui Gas Company that I talked about earlier, it is a consortium of so many different partners. South Korea, POSCO International, or Daewoo, formerly known as Daewoo, was the first company that came in, but it was also, implicating Woodside Energy, which is an Australian company that was heavily involved in the exploration of, or the appraisal of the gas resources within Myanmar. So it isn't just, one single entity that was involved in this. We talk about Myanmar, we talk about India, the significant infrastructures that actually make up the Shui Gas project also come from not just POSCO. It comes from Military Oil and Gas Company, which is, Myanmar. South Korea actually holds about 51% of that project. MOGE, or the Myanmar Military Oil and Gas Company, only holds about 15%. The other side of this was ONGC Videsh, which is India, state-owned company, 17%. GAIL India, 8.5%, and Kogas, which is also a state-owned company from South Korea, 8.5%. None of these countries have actually held themselves accountable, or, by the international community, we've never really held them accountable. On top of that, India and Southeast Asian nations are rife with propaganda that is about Rohingya being terrible, targeting hate speech against Rohingya so that they can deport us back to Myanmar. I will talk about implications on that later on when we have time. But all of these companies are not just involved in one aspect of the genocide, but they're also helping to basically create an emergence or reemergence of these mass atrocities, or the factors that go into it. So without holding these factors or these companies accountable, there is no way to end a genocide.
Thanks so much. Before Vidya speaks, I would just ask the panelists if you have some resources that you would like to share with the audience, especially in terms of like the company names that we should keep an eye out for. Please do share them in the chat. Vidya?
Yeah, thanks, Maria. Yeah, so you asked about, you've got these long running campaigns or focus on companies. Actually, in relation to the dogs, something did happen. I'm not sure if we could call it a success or not. Some are calling it a success. I don't know if I agree. So we exposed the company at 3 companies actually, and then we started preparing, because at some point we said we may have enough to litigate, or at least to start a discovery proceeding under new Dutch legislation. So we had written to the company through a lawyer twice, and we really wanted to get all the relevant information concerning who they supply dogs to and the end use of the dogs, etc. And 4 days before we were going to file in court, 4 days before we were filing our discovery procedure, the company publicly announced that they had ceased all activities. And they removed the banner from their property. And, well, a lot of people celebrated it because then, we got some form of accountability. I think it's great that they felt the heat, that they felt they had no longer had the protection of the Israeli state, which they had received before when they got sued. You referred 10 years ago, the company was sued in the Netherlands by a boy and his father because the boy was mutilated by a dog that had been provided to the army by that company. And eventually the company ended up settling, and we went through a number of leaked documents to find out that actually the Israeli Ministry of Defense and Israeli Ministry of Justice supported the company in its legal defense. And the settlement agreement was not green-lighted until the Israeli Ministry of Justice green-lighted it and paid for it, actually. It paid for the settlement. So again, just goes to show the intertwinement, the intertwined levels between state and corporation. Now the company says we no longer, we seized all activities, we keep monitoring, and I'm sure that the demand for dogs in the Israeli military prison service hasn't evaporated. So we just need to find out where the dogs are coming from at the moment and do everything we can to have retroactive accountability. Just to mention some areas where I do think I see positive impacts and real changes is in case you're not familiar with it, I really recommend everyone to look it up. Don't Buy Into Occupation. It's a collective of a lot of civil society organizations that do research and advocate, campaign, and they have been looking into the investments made by European banks, pension funds, and insurance companies into corporations that are embedded in Israel's atrocity crimes one way or another. And some of those, specifically pension funds, have been reaching out to us and want to understand. But now it's on the top of their list because it's also becoming a reputational risk for them. And now some of them are starting to take actual steps of divesting and disengaging from business relationships that were previously unquestioned. So again, I think I don't think it's out of the goodness of their heart. I think it's when we up the price and we increase the cost of continued complicity, that's when they may start to shift, whether it is their good name or their business model. So yeah, that's where I do see some movement, but it's too little, too slow, obviously.
Thanks, Lydia. We have about 5 minutes left in the panel, and so I would just ask for each of you to give 1 or 2 minute closing remark. And for Joe specifically, I was hoping that you could address the Trump administration and the weakening of environmental law that has affected your work, if it has at all. But also, everyone, please feel free to give any other comments that you would like to have. Thank you. We'll start, going in the same order that we presented in with Defe.
Right now we're working on a court case in an administrative court. It would be nice to connect, and if you have time to send a friends of the court letter, we just wanted to make use of it to create for a campaign activities in Indonesia and also outside Indonesia. West Papua is not an empty land. Thank you.
Thank you. Yasmin?
Thank you so much, and really, really thankful to be here to have this very, very honest discussion about our responsibility and what we can do to hold corporate REIT accountable for the kind of mass atrocities the world has witnessed. Genocide is profit-driven, but humanity cannot survive in the case that we continue to increase values for shareholders. And so I invite all of you to contact us, to be in touch, and to actually explore ways we could work together, because a lot of this is intertwined. There are no ways for us to escape some of these imperialist forces, colonial ideals, and corporate greed. And so if there are ways for us to work together to ensure that we keep the needle moving, that would be, wonderful. Please check out The Coup Watch by Altsan Burma, and let's continue to have this discussion and put it to action. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe?
Yes, thanks once again for the opportunity to join the panel groups, and we are facing strange times and different times than we've ever, I think, for me, experienced before. The fight is ongoing, and it's really scary not knowing what laws and what rules and regulations are going to be in place the next day. So it's just been a battle of trying our best to hold up and hold a line, as much as we can. And unfortunately, the line, we were still behind even with the line that we had. So now we're having to prop that up and try to advance in these times. And it's hard when groups and advocates or just people who want to protect their communities and protect themselves are seen now as terrorists, or even our funders are seeing harassment or getting questioned by this administration. So we have to move carefully, but at the same time, we're still moving and we're adjusting. And just thanks to all of our legal advocates. Center for Constitutional Rights has been really big in protecting us and communities in Cancer Alley, and we're seeing a difference. And our success, unfortunately, sometimes is motivating the wrong type of action, but at least we are accomplishing success, and we should remember that. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Lydia?
Yeah, thanks. I don't think I have much to add to that. I mean, I think we're all seeing the same trends and experiencing them in different ways. Some are also definitely seeing the ripple effect of when you have impactful work, you will face lawsuits and loss of funding. So that's definitely happening. And I think, but that's why these conversations are so important, and connecting the dots and connecting the struggles. And I think that would, to continue exchanging and learning and building on each other. And often we're dealing with the same perpetrators. So when we can join forces there, I think there's huge potential for powerful work too. And yeah, just much respect to everything all the other panelists are doing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I second all of that. I think it's been a very interesting discussion, and it really highlights how a lot of the same companies are involved, the same sectors, the same types of policies that we're seeing really across countries, across communities. So thank you to the panelists for sharing with us. I hope we can do this again at another point. And thank you to everyone that has joined online to listen. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.